Could China be key in tackling the small boats crisis? Keir Starmer has been meeting President Xi Jinping in Beijing and is hoping a new security pact will be a game changer.
Within a dialogue actually about greater strategic focus on security and defence, but for us it's very important on small boats that we get our arms around the engines that are being used in those small boats.
The Prime Minister is also pledging to put more money in British pockets through a better relationship with China. So will it work, and what are the risks?
Are British police going to be cooperating with the same Chinese police forces that cracked down on pro-democracy activists or on the Uyghur Muslims, which are big issues which the Prime Minister has repeatedly been asked, will he raise them? And today he said that after his meeting with President Xi, he had done that. But of course, the question always in these cases is not just, did you talk about it? It's how forcefully did you do it? How much did you push it?
I'm Paul Brand, and this is What You Need to Know. Joining me from Beijing is political correspondent Carl Dinnen. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Paul.
A lot has been announced already in terms of the Prime Minister and Xi Jinping and what they've been able to agree on. Should we start with this small boats agreement? Because I think it will be news to some just how much various countries end up being, through no intention of their own necessarily, involved in sort of the supply chain for these boats and the crossings across the channel. And with China, it's small boat engines, isn't it? So what have they been talking about?
Well, yeah, it's engines, but it's also the boats themselves and other parts. And I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that China makes a lot of those things, because China makes a lot of everything. And what they've said today is that there will be policing level cooperation to try and crack down on the boats and engines going directly to people smugglers. And I think that this is a case of the government pursuing this stuff upstream, as they would call it, because there are already some restrictions in parts of Europe, in France and Germany, on how easy it is to buy small boats and engines. You know, in some cases you need licenses and that kind of thing. So it is getting harder for the people smugglers to pick them up in Europe. So the evidence, we are told, is that they're starting to get them direct from suppliers in China. And now the Prime Minister is talking to the Chinese about clamping down on that. So no surprise that they're building them. That's the rationale for it. I think what is interesting is the idea of Britain and China cooperating on a law and order issue, because Britain and China have been so far apart on so many kind of security issues and issues that are adjacent to that, that this level of cooperation feels like something really quite new.
Yeah, and this is probably a good point to talk about that broader cooperation, because it's not without controversy, is it, that Keir Starmer is out there cozying up to Xi Jinping. I mean, there's the fact that it might upset President Trump. We thought that was the strategy from Keir Starmer, to be as close to America as possible. There's the issue around human rights, the likes of Jimmy Lai, who's in prison over there. So already Keir Starmer is getting criticism back home from those who say we should be really cautious about getting closer to China. Why do you think Keir Starmer is keen to do this? And what are the political risks for him, do you think?
Well, it's because China is the second biggest economy in the world, and they're growing rapidly. I mean, 4 or 5% growth a year. That's a good 5 times faster than the UK is growing. And Keir Starmer wants to make sure, his number one priority being growth, as he often says, that Britain is able to access that market. And in fact, today they've just announced an intention to start working on some sort of services agreement, services being Britain's biggest export. It makes complete sense to try and get a deal that would allow Britain to export, you know, things like financial services more readily to a big economy like this one. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it is controversial in some respects. And that policing thing, going back to policing and the boats, I mean, one wonders, you know, are British police going to be cooperating with the same Chinese police forces that in turn here cracked down on pro-democracy activists or on the Uyghur Muslims, which are big issues which the Prime Minister has repeatedly been asked, will he raise them? I mean, Jimmy Lai, the pro-democracy activist in Hong Kong who's in prison, will he raise that? And he said he would address them, he would raise them. And today he said that after his meeting with President Xi, he had done that. But of course, the question always in these cases is not just, did you talk about it? It's how forcefully did you do it? How much did you push it? And when the Prime Minister was asked about that, he wouldn't answer. He only said, I raised the issues. He said he raised all the difficult issues. And afterwards, his spokesman said that they were discussed in a constructive and respectful tone. So I think that means it was a very careful conversation.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess it wasn't a very long one.
Yeah, normally robust is the word they use, isn't it, in these briefings when they want to say that a conversation has been a little bit more spicy or a bit more forceful.
Yeah.
Respectful
Or
to
full and
me.
frank if it's gone
Full
badly.
and frank, yeah, that's a classic. So as you say, the economy is a massive, massive part of why Keir Starmer's over there and the drive for growth. What kind of trade deals have already been done? Because they like to announce a few of these on these trips, don't they?
Yeah, and as we speak, we're sort of in the middle of those agreements, or that they've signed a number of memoranda of understanding, and we're just starting to get fed those. I think the big one is the one I mentioned on services. Looking forward to that. There's also talk of reducing tariffs on Scotch whiskey. Another thing that could be reasonably big is the relaxation of visa rules.
Yes.
So the Chinese have said that they will allow visa-free travel for Brits going to China for less than 30 days. That could make it a lot easier for people, for tourists, but also for people going on business trips to come to China. Actually, on that front, the other thing that is interesting is that they are talked about allowing parliamentarians to travel more easily between Britain and China. And that is particularly significant because there are a number of British MPs who have actually been sanctioned by China, people like Ian Duncan Smith and Nuz Ghani and Tom Tugendhat and Neil O'Brien as well, who have been sanctioned. Now, they've been sanctioned because they're China critics. I'm not sure if they'll want to come here, but if that signals a relaxation of those sanctions, then that would actually be quite a significant moment, I think, in relations between Britain and China.
Definitely. I wonder as well, from your perspective there, being on the ground, and I appreciate sometimes on these trips, you're stuck to some extent with the British delegation. You don't get to speak to that many from the Chinese side, I don't suppose. But what's in it for China? I remember going on a trip with Theresa May to India, for example, where she was very excited about going to India, but actually the Indians didn't seem quite as excited about her coming there. And China might be our third biggest trading partner, but we don't even appear in its top 10. So is there much in it for China? What's the win for them, do you think?
Well, certainly on the strategic scale, I think Xi Jinping wants China to be, the dominant nation, not just, in this hemisphere, but the dominant nation. He believes that China will eventually overtake the United States as the biggest economy and the biggest military power in the world. And I think he would like to just increase everyone's reliance on China and everyone's engagement with China. I think he would love to be able to split some of America's allies off from the United States. And certainly at the moment, there is a good opportunity from the Chinese point of view to at least try and get in there as a more steady, stable partner than perhaps some people might think of the United States as being. All that said, that is not the British view. Keir Starmer is very clear that the United States is still our closest ally, regardless of differences that there may have been in recent weeks and months. And I think President Xi will understand that as well. I mean, he knows that he's not going to be able to drive much of a wedge between Britain and the United States, but he can still, draw Britain that little bit closer to China, even if he's not necessarily pulling us away from the United States. But his big picture, his vision is for a preeminent China on the world stage, and that means having good relations with and economic relations with everyone.
And just lastly, do you get a sense that maybe sometimes the Chinese get a bit fed up of the yo-yoing that goes on in Britain in terms of our attitude towards China? I mean, I'm sure it probably works both ways to some extent. China probably goes through phases as well in terms of its international relations. But, I remember Cameron going down the pub when there was a big Chinese delegation coming to visit when he was Prime Minister. Then we had a sort of cooling off of relations. And now we seem to be back on again. I mean, there's just sort of no continuity really in our approach to China.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer described that on the plane on the way over when he was talking to us. He described that as the last Tory government's veering from the golden age, the Cameron era, to the ice age. And he wanted to strike a more, obviously a more Starmerite centrist position. He's been talking about cooperating where we can and challenging where we must. I mean, in his remarks today, President Xi said something kind of similar. He put it slightly differently. He said that there had been many twists and turns in recent years in the relationships between the two countries, and that had not been to either country's advantage. So I think the Chinese accept that, that's the way it has been. Look, China is such a different place. It has been run by the same man for years and years and years with an increasing level of grip. Which is even in recent weeks with the purge of generals has increased. So China's foreign policy has remained pretty steady, not static, but heading in the same direction reasonably constantly. Whereas Britain's attitude towards China has shifted and has moved around a bit. That may not be settling, but I mean, there is still in the background always. Obviously, the problems we've talked about with human rights, but also the issues about cyber surveillance, about spying, about cybersecurity, I should say, and spying. There is still a contested area between Britain and China, which always has the possibility to spill over and to create problems in other parts of the relationship.
Yeah, and I suppose talking of relationships, the last thing we should just touch on before I let you go is the relationship with President Trump. I mean, I'm kind of curious to see whether he tweets about, or he doesn't tweet anymore, does he? It's all through social, but whether he posts about Starmer's trip to China or whether this upsets President Trump at all.
Yeah, he was very upset recently when the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was here and was talking about doing a trade deal, and Donald Trump talked about slapping tariffs on Canada over that. I mean, President Trump talks about slapping tariffs on everyone for everything, and sometimes they happen and sometimes they don't. I mean, we have this saying, taco Trump, always chickens out. I'm not sure that's always actually the case. I think Trump often chickens out. Which isn't quite such a neat acronym.
No,
but,
TOCO.
I agree with you. It will be interesting to see if he does on this one. I don't think that any of the announcements are probably big enough to trigger him. Maybe if the services agreement was done and dusted and announced. Added to that, he's coming here himself later in the year. So maybe it isn't a time where he's going to be trying to criticize other people for doing deals with, punish other people for doing deals with China. But it's Donald Trump. Who knows?
Who knows? Paul? Exactly. I asked you an impossible question. Carl, thank you so much for your time. Good luck with the rest of the trip in China. And for more analysis from Carl and the rest of our team, head to itv.com/news and follow ITV News on YouTube. Thanks for joining us.